My family used to say I was far too sensitive, right up until the sheriff appeared on their porch holding papers with my name printed across the top. There were no arguments, no yelling, no desperate pleas to stop. Just a heavy silence broken by the sound of everything they believed in beginning to crumble. They looked at me as if I had rewritten the family's entire history overnight. I didn't try to soothe them and I didn't defend myself. I simply stepped aside and allowed the truth to take its place. It had started a week earlier, inside Denver International Airport, when I discovered exactly what my parents truly thought of me. One canceled plane ticket, 2 text messages, and the entire foundation of our relationship shifted forever. Before I continue, take a moment to hit like and share where you're listening from. And if your own family has ever pushed you too far, leave your story below. It's good to remember that none of us go through this kind of pain alone. If you had met me a few years back, you might have assumed I came from one of those warm, cheerful families that crowd into diner booths every Sunday morning. People often told me I had a soft, trusting face, the kind that must have grown up surrounded by kindness. I never corrected them. Pretending was easier than admitting the truth. That my family's greatest love was control, not affection. When I was a child, my mother treated my older sister, Cleo, like some rare collectible. She got the brand new outfits, the perfectly decorated bedroom, and the framed portraits lining every hallway. I got secondhand clothes from neighbors, endless lectures about gratitude, and a spot on the floor during holidays when every chair was reserved for someone else. My father didn't light the match, but he always stood close enough to feel the warmth of the fire. Whenever my mother's comments stung, he'd simply smirk or pretend not to hear. That was how he picked his side. By the time I left for college, I had already been kicked out of that house twice. Once for daring to talk back and once because Cleo didn't want to share the bathroom. Winters near Denver hit harder when you're 17 and standing outside with a trash bag full of clothes, wondering where to sleep. But survival has a strange way of teaching you independence. I realized that if I wanted safety, I'd have to build it on my own. So I did, quietly and steadily. I took every internship no one else wanted, studied financial planning late into the night in a campus library that always smelled faintly of burnt popcorn and worn carpet, and worked my way through school without asking anyone for help. Years later, when I finally moved into a small condo overlooking the lake, it wasn't lavish, but it was mine. The concierge knew my name. My 6-year-old son, gentle and soft-spoken, finally had his own bedroom, a space where no one told him he was in the way. He's the only person who has ever made me feel like I take up the exact right amount of space. My parents never understood that my distance wasn't rebellion. It was self-preservation. Even after I became a financial consultant, even after I purchased my own place and built a life from nothing, they still treated me like the family's backup child. Cleo remained the center of their universe, the golden daughter with the polished husband, the perfect family photos, and the endless validation. So when I saved enough money for a short getaway, a tiny reward I had earned entirely on my own, I didn't tell a soul. Not my mother, not my father, not even Cleo. I wanted a few quiet days where no one could reach me, criticize me, or drain the life from me. But in my family, secrets never stay buried for long. The moment my mother discovered I was leaving town, everything began to unravel. That morning felt unnaturally peaceful. The kind of calm that tricks you into thinking maybe the universe has finally decided to go easy on you. I left my condo early, kissed my son on the forehead, and promised to bring him back something small from the airport gift shop. He waved sleepily from the doorway, his hair still tousled, and for the first time in weeks I allowed myself to breathe. Denver International buzzed with its usual rhythm. Rolling suitcases, coffee steam, and travelers caught between exhaustion and hope. I blended in effortlessly. Jeans, a long coat, hair tied back. Nothing about me stood out. Nothing suggested that within minutes, everything I thought I knew about my family would shatter. At the check-in counter, I handed over my ID and confirmation code, already imagining how good it would feel to silence my phone once I boarded. The airline agent scanned my ticket, frowned, and tried again. Her expression shifted. Not confusion, but discomfort. "Let me just double-check something," she said, her fingers tapping rapidly across the keyboard. A knot formed deep in my chest. "Is something wrong?" I asked. She turned the monitor slightly toward me. "Your ticket shows as canceled. The refund was processed about an hour ago." The word canceled hit harder than I expected. That's not possible, I managed to say. I didn't cancel anything. She hesitated before reading the details aloud. The refund went to a card ending in 4401. My stomach dropped straight through the airport floor. I knew exactly whose card that was, my mother's. Somehow, I thanked the agent and stepped aside. The noise of the terminal suddenly magnified. My phone buzzed before I could even process it. A message preview lit up the screen from her. Have fun walking home. Loser. Another followed, being poor suits you. Take the bus like you should. There was no attempt to soften it. No joke, no emoji, just words sharp enough to draw blood. I stared until the letters blurred. Surrounded by travelers moving like a river. Unsure whether I was standing still or being swept away. It wasn't the canceled ticket that broke me. It wasn't even the insults. It was the realization, the brutal clarity, that my parents didn't just tolerate belittling me. They enjoyed it. They needed me to stay small so they could feel large. I walked out of the terminal into the freezing air. Not sure where to go. Only certain that I couldn't stay there another second. My hands trembled as I opened a rideshare app. But before I could finish typing my address, a white sedan rolled to a stop. The driver leaned out the window. Are you all right? You look like someone just dropped a piano on your day. I exhaled, the sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Close enough, I said. It was a text message. He nodded knowingly, the kind of gesture that comes from seeing too many kinds of heartbreak. Hop in, he said. I'm off shift, but you look like you need to be anywhere but here. I hesitated for only a moment before climbing into the passenger seat. The car smelled faintly of pine and worn leather. He introduced himself as Mason, a lifelong Denver local who drove part-time, and then he just listened. No advice. No judgment. Just quiet understanding. Somehow I found myself telling him everything. The canceled flight, the cruel messages, the years of swallowing words I should have screamed. When we finally parked beside a small city park, Mason rested his hands on the steering wheel and spoke softly. People disguise cruelty as love all the time, he said. But pretending doesn't make it real. I turned toward the windshield, watching pale winter sunlight flicker through the bare branches outside. Then slowly I reached for my phone, not to read their messages again, but to open a folder I had hidden for years. It was labeled options, investments, payments, trust deed, records of every single month they had been late on rent for the house they never even realized belonged to me. For the first time in years I whispered to myself, the anger isn't devouring me anymore. It's refining me. When Mason dropped me off near my building, the morning chill had turned sharper. The kind of cold that slices through exhaustion and demands alertness. I thanked him sincerely, promised I'd be fine, and walked toward the entrance with a steady calm I hadn't felt in ages. The calm of someone whose thoughts had finally stopped spinning out of control. Inside the lobby, the warmth wrapped around me like quiet validation. The faint hum of the radiators filled the silence. It felt like stepping into an entirely different world. One where I didn't have to shrink to make room for anyone else's comfort. I hung up my coat, sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The folder titled Options waited exactly where I'd left it. That digital folder held the story of a life my family had never bothered to ask about. I clicked it open, and the screen flooded with years of carefully organized documents, investment records, property payments, contracts, and one particular trust deed listing me as the owner of the very house my parents had been living in for nearly 2 full years. I scrolled through it slowly, breathing in the truth of the life I had built while they were too busy diminishing me. Each document was a small monument to perseverance. Proof that I had created something meaningful without their permission or praise. They had always assumed I was struggling simply because I drove an old car and wore modest clothes. It never occurred to them that I kept my success quiet not from shame, but for protection. Yet the texts at the airport made something clear. Protecting myself wasn't enough anymore. I needed to protect my son. I needed to stop pretending their cruelty was something I could eventually grow past. Memories surfaced uninvited. Crisp and unforgiving. Cleo pushing me out the front door one freezing night because her boyfriend didn't like extra people in the house. My mother calling me dramatic while I stood outside in the snow clutching a backpack. My father handing Cleo an envelope of cash on her college move-in day before turning to me with a sermon about earning things the right way. Those memories blended into a single undeniable truth. I couldn't keep letting them carve pieces out of me and still call it love. I opened another folder, one containing a handful of short audio clips I hadn't meant to record. A few weeks earlier, I had stopped by their house to drop off a receipt and had left a baby monitor running in my bag, more out of distrust than intent. When I played the first clip, their voices filled the kitchen around me. "She thinks she's better than us," my mother said, her tone cold and amused. "Cancel it. Teach her a lesson." "She can take the bus," my father added, laughing. "She's always pretending she has it so hard. Maybe now she'll prove it." Their laughter was light, careless, the kind people use when discussing a stranger, not their daughter. I sat back, letting the fury crystallize into something cold and deliberate. I wasn't going to fight them with insults. I wasn't going to sink to their level. Instead, I would use the one strength they had always dismissed in me: preparation. By early afternoon, I had drafted 3 eviction notices, one for each adult living in the house. I reviewed every lease clause, payment delay, and sign violation they had ignored. Every line was airtight, every document lawful. When the sun began to dip behind the lake outside my window, painting the sky in muted gold and dusty rose, I slid the notices into a plain envelope. My hands didn't tremble this time. For years they had accused me of being too soft, too quiet, too forgiving. Maybe that was true. But softness isn't weakness, not when it finally decides to protect itself. I placed the envelope on the counter, drew a long, even breath, and whispered to the quiet room, "I'm not returning as their daughter. I'm returning as their landlord." 3 days after that moment in the airport, I stood at the end of my parents' walkway, looking up at the house I once tiptoed through like a guest. The lawn was overgrown, the porch light flickered weakly, and Cleo's SUV sat crooked in the driveway, as though she'd rushed home, assuming someone else would clean up after her. I tightened my coat, climbed the steps, and turned the handle without knocking. The familiar smell of lemon cleaner and stale coffee met me like a memory I no longer belonged to. My mother sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. My father was in the kitchen making a sandwich. Cleo leaned against the island, filing her nails with bored indifference. My mother looked up first, her expression sour. "Why are you here?" she asked. Not curiosity, not worry, just irritation, like I'd interrupted her routine. My father didn't look up. "Shouldn't you be sulking somewhere?" he muttered. "Heard your little trip fell apart." Cleo smirked, tapping her nail file against the counter. "Yeah, we figured you'd still be crying at the terminal. Guess the charity flight left without you." Their laughter, casual and cruel, echoed across the room. If they had looked closer, they might have noticed the difference in me. My shoulders were square. My voice, when I finally spoke, was steady. I was no longer the guest in this house. I set my bag on the floor, pulled out the plain envelope, and placed it on the counter in front of Cleo. "What's that?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Your notice," I said quietly. "All of yours." My mother gave a short, mocking laugh. "Notice for what? Eviction?" Silence followed. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to fade. I took 3 identical papers from the envelope and set them down, one on the counter, one on the refrigerator door, and one on the bottom stair. My father stepped forward, snatched the paper from the fridge, and read the heading aloud. "You don't own this house," he said sharply. "Oh, but I do," I replied, reaching back into the envelope and pulling out the trust deed. "You signed a lease 2 years ago with Elmrook Trust." My mother crossed her arms, frowning. "We thought that was some management company." "It is," I said evenly. "Mine." My father's expression hardened. "This is absurd. You can't evict your own family." I tilted my head slightly. "You already did, twice, before I even turned 20. Cleo rolled her eyes, dismissive. "You're being dramatic." My father sneered. "You don't have the money to own a house." "Interesting theory," I replied evenly. "Because the payments, utility bills, financial statements, and your own signatures on the lease say otherwise." My mother stepped forward, her voice rising until it cracked. "This is ridiculous. You think you can frighten us with a few sheets of paper? We raised you." "No," I said quietly but firmly. "You controlled me. You drained me. And you punished me for building a life you didn't approve of." My father threw the eviction notice onto the counter with a sharp slap. "Even if any of this is real, You don't have legal grounds. Without speaking, I unlocked my phone and pressed play. The same recording I'd listened to alone in my condo now filled their kitchen. My mother's voice, casual and cruel. Cancel it. Teach her a lesson. My father's voice followed. She can take the bus. She's always so dramatic. Then the sound of their laughter, light, unbothered, almost joyful. Cleo froze, her smirk gone. You recorded us? I recorded my property being occupied by tenants who violated their lease and used emotional manipulation to maintain control over me, I answered. My mother's color drained away. Turn that off, she demanded. But I let the audio keep playing, their words echoing sharply against the tile backsplash. Cleo slammed her palm against the counter. You can't kick us out. I have children. We're a family. Exactly, I said. A family that didn't hesitate to make my son sit on the floor last Christmas because you decided he wasn't a real cousin. Cleo's mouth opened, but a new sound interrupted, the buzz of my phone. A notification glowed on the screen. Payment received from Cleo Brennan. Cleo lunged forward. You said the rent was delayed. It was, I said evenly. Until you laughed when I fell down the stairs carrying gifts for your kids. I decided that apology should come with interest. Her jaw tightened. You're unbelievable. No, I replied softly. I'm simply consistent. My father tried again, his tone shifting from anger to disbelief. Where do you expect us to go? I gave you 60 days written notice, I reminded him. You ignored it. You're 3 months behind on payments and you sent me those messages. Tell me, if any landlord received that kind of harassment from a tenant, what do you think would happen? Cleo snapped. You're punishing us for a joke. That wasn't a joke, I said. It was a confession. My mother gripped the counter for balance. Elise, be reasonable. Reasonable. I repeated slowly. You canceled my ticket. You called me a loser. You told me to walk home and you enjoyed it. My father's voice broke. You're really doing this? I reached into the envelope one last time, withdrew a single page, and placed it in the center of the island. Their faces went pale as they read the heading. It was the formal enforcement order, the document that authorized the sheriff to act. This, I said, is already filed. You have 3 days. My mother shook her head, eyes wet not from regret but from panic. We never meant to hurt you. Yes, you did, I said quietly. You just never expected to face the consequences. Cleo's eyes darted around the room, suddenly uncertain in the house she had treated like her throne. What are you trying to prove? That I matter, I said, and that my son deserves better than watching his mother be treated like a servant. My father threw his hands up. Unbelievable. I picked up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. 3 days. The sheriff will take it from here. As I stepped onto the porch, my mother's voice wavered behind me. What happened to you? I turned back just enough to answer. I stopped begging for a seat at a table I paid for. Then I walked away while they stood frozen in the doorway, their lives finally catching up to their choices. 3 days passed faster than any of us expected. On Thursday morning, a sheriff's car rolled quietly up the street. My parents stood on the porch surrounded by half-packed boxes, disbelief etched into their faces, as if the world owed them a pause that never came. Cleo was already gone. She'd left the night before, dragging her suitcases down the driveway while arguing on the phone with her husband about the money she had used without his knowledge. The sheriff moved through the process calmly, explaining each step and giving them time to gather what little they had left. There was no shouting, no dramatic breakdown. Only the slow, inevitable unraveling of a family that had mistaken cruelty for connection. My mother reached for my arm as movers carried out her boxes. Elise, she whispered, we're still your parents. I stepped back. And I'm still the daughter you never protected. She looked down not at me but at the house behind her, the house she had once believed she owned. When everything was cleared out, I left the sheriff a sealed envelope to place inside. It contained a single photo, me and my son smiling in front of the lake. On the back I'd written one line. This is the family I choose. When I returned to my condo that evening, the lake outside my window was still and bright, its reflection calm, steady, unbroken. My phone buzzed once. An unread message from Cleo, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The canceled flight, the insults, the years of quiet endurance. All of it had led here, to this moment where I finally stopped letting their version of family define my worth. When I opened the door, my son ran to me, arms wide, trust absolute. Something my parents had never offered. That was enough. If you've ever had to reclaim your peace from those who were supposed to protect it, share your story below and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.